But I was wondering if there's an actor that you worked with that you felt that way.
Well,
At 83, Harrison Ford doesn't bother pretending anymore. The gravel in his voice has gotten deeper, more honest, more real. Like a man who's seen everything Hollywood can throw his way and still walked out with that crooked grin. His eyes may have a few more lines now, but that spark, that dangerous, boyish, roguish spark, it's still there. He's the man who once outran boulders, faced down Nazis, flew the Millennium Falcon, and made millions believe in adventure again. But behind the fedora and the blaster, behind the legendary roles and the stardom, there's still a man who remembers what it's like to be undone by a single glance from the right woman. The studio lights were warm that night, the cameras rolling quietly as the host leaned in. It wasn't a serious interview, not the kind that digs for scandals or headlines. It was playful, nostalgic. Everyone expected stories about old stunts, wild nights, and dusty sets. What no one expected was what happened when that one question dropped. Harrison was relaxed, fingers lightly tapping on the armrest, as if he was just another guest, not a legend. His voice had that easy, worn-in charm, like a leather jacket that only got better with age. No PR filters, no polished answers. Just Harrison Ford, the man, the myth, the rogue. And then came the question that would make the room go silent. The host smiled, the kind of smile that meant trouble. He leaned closer to the mic and asked the sort of question most actors laugh off or turn into a joke. Harrison, in all these years, all these films, all these leading ladies, was there ever someone who really got to you? Someone who made Han Solo and Indiana Jones nervous? The crowd laughed softly, half expecting him to wave it away with a joke. But Harrison didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, the corner of his mouth twitching upward like he already had an answer tucked away. The host pushed a little more, grinning wide. Come on, you're 83. You can tell us now. Who were the women in Hollywood that made your head spin? The studio let out a collective, "Oh!" It wasn't a cruel question. It was the kind of question fans had secretly wondered for decades. Harrison had stood next to some of the most breathtaking women in film history. But who had he remembered long after the director yelled, "Cut"? He tilted his head back slightly, took a slow breath, and then, with that wicked gleam in his eye, he answered. 7, Harrison said, clear and calm. Just one word. The laughter died instantly. The room stilled. It was like everyone inhaled at once and forgot to exhale. 7. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, eyes catching the light just enough to remind everyone why he'd been the ultimate leading man for half a century. The grin followed, slow, dangerous, the kind that said he was enjoying every second of this. There are 7 women, he added, voice dropping just a little, that signature Ford growl coming through. Who could have had me? No questions asked. The host's eyebrows shot up. The audience erupted in gasps and nervous laughter. Harrison chuckled too, that low, rumbling laugh that came from somewhere deep. Don't look so surprised, he said with a mock glare. 50 years in this town, you meet people who don't just walk past you. They stay with you. It wasn't a rehearsed line. It wasn't a PR answer. It was a confession, one only a man with nothing left to prove could make. And when the host leaned in, teasing for names, Harrison didn't hide behind silence this time. He leaned into the mic and said, "What the hell? Who's gonna stop me now?" The studio burst into applause, cheers, laughter. Harrison raised his eyebrows, savoring the moment like a man telling an old war story. The host fanned the flames. 7 names, huh? I think the world needs to hear them. Harrison just smirked at first, dragging the silence out, letting it hang like a cliffhanger. He knew exactly what he was doing. A lifetime of playing the rogue hadn't dulled the instinct to tease. Some of them, he said, pausing deliberately. You probably already know. Some might surprise you. The host leaned closer. The crowd leaned forward. Harrison tilted his head, grinned wide, and finally said the words that sent a jolt through the studio. All right, let's do this. And just like that, Harrison Ford, the man who had once stolen hearts on screen, began to list the 7 women who haunted his daydreams, his memories, and the quiet corners of his mind. She was dangerous, Harrison started, his smile softening. Not the kind of dangerous with guns or knives. The kind that looks at you and knows exactly what you're thinking. Carrie was brilliant, unpredictable, magnetic. She could make a whole room disappear with just one look. On set, they laughed like conspirators. Off set, the line between fiction and feeling blurred more than once. She'd lean in, he said, eyes glinting. Just a little too close, and I'd forget every damn line. What made her unforgettable wasn't just beauty. It was wit, that wicked intelligence that kept him on his toes. She dared him to fall. And he almost did. She wasn't the kind of woman you got over, he added quietly. She was the kind that stuck with you. If she'd said the word back then, I'd have followed her straight into hyperspace. Harrison's grin widened at her name. Sigourney Weaver, he said, like it was both a confession and a challenge. She didn't flirt like the others. She didn't have to. She had presence, tall, calm, untouchable. When she walked into a room, you noticed. Everyone did. She had the kind of quiet authority that made heroes want to hand over the reins. I was the big hero in my films, Harrison laughed. But Sigourney? She was the one who looked like she'd actually saved the day. What got him wasn't a line or a laugh. It was the way she could look at you like she was already in control of the scene. And you were just lucky to be in it. She had this smile, he said softly. Rare. When it showed up, you were done. And if the universe had ever put them in the same quiet corner of a party, well, even Indiana Jones wouldn't have stood a chance. When Harrison said her name, the entire audience sighed in recognition. Sophia Loren, he repeated slowly, like savoring a good whiskey. She didn't need dialogue. She was the dialogue. He'd watched her in old films long before he ever wore a fedora. She had that dangerous mix, beauty and confidence. She didn't ask permission to own the room. She was the room. I used to think, he chuckled, if I ever sat next to her, I'd forget my own name. And I meant it. Sophia wasn't just a crush. She was an era, a heartbeat, a standard of beauty that made men lose balance. She made you believe desire wasn't just natural, he added with a grin. It was inevitable. She wasn't the kind of woman you chased. She was the kind of woman who made you grateful just to be in the same room. Harrison let out a low whistle at her name. Helen Mirren, he said, shaking his head. That woman walks like she already knows every secret in the room. She was elegant, regal, but beneath it, there was a streak of wildness, like a storm wrapped in silk. She carried herself like a queen, but she laughed like someone who'd jump on a motorcycle just to see where the night goes. She has that thing, Harrison said, tapping his chest. She makes you want to behave, and misbehave at the same time. What got him was her voice, low, confident, dangerous. The kind of voice that could make a man confess things he hadn't even admitted to himself. Helen Mirren, he whispered with a grin. Yeah, she could have had me. She had that look, Harrison said simply. The one that hits you before she even says a word. Michelle had a softness wrapped in danger, like honey hiding fire. On screen, she lit everything up. Off screen, there was something quieter, sharper, the kind of presence that left fingerprints on your memory. The eyes, he muttered half to himself. It was always the eyes. She was the kind of woman who didn't need a grand gesture. One small smile from her could undo years of practiced cool. If I'd ever had the guts to say something back then, he laughed softly. Who knows? She was... Wow, Harrison said, tilting his head as if trying to remember the exact shade of lightning. Raquel Welch. That woman didn't walk into a room. She erupted into it. There was nothing subtle about Raquel. She was a force. Fire in a red dress. And Harrison, no matter how cool, had once found himself staring like a kid who just saw magic. She didn't need to say a word, he said with a sly grin. She already owned you. It wasn't just beauty. It was energy. She carried the kind of wildness that made even the most confident man rethink his composure. Yeah, he said, shaking his head with a laugh. She would have broken me, and I'd have thanked her. When he got to the last name, his voice softened just a touch. Jane Fonda, he said, almost like a memory he'd held on to for too long. She was bold, political, fearless. A woman who never played by the rules. And maybe that's exactly why she left an imprint on him. She didn't care who liked her, he said. And that's what made everyone fall in love with her anyway. There was something intoxicating about someone who knew who they were and didn't apologize for it. Jane had that power. She was the kind of woman, he added slowly, who made you want to be better, or at least interesting enough to keep up. When he finished the list, the room was silent for a heartbeat, the kind of silence that doesn't come from shock but from awe. Harrison leaned back in his chair, a man who had seen a lifetime of lights and love and quiet, unspoken almosts. "You don't forget women like that," he said softly. "They don't just pass through your life. They leave fingerprints on your memory, on your story." This wasn't about regret. It wasn't even about what could have been. It was about the fact that some people, the right people, stay. Long after the cameras stop rolling, long after the applause fades. "You make a lot of movies," he added with a small grin, "but some scenes stay with you forever." The audience finally let out the breath they'd been holding. The host laughed, shaking his head. "7 names, Harrison." "You really went there." Harrison just shrugged. That same rogue grin on his face that had once charmed galaxies and jungles alike. "Hey," he said with a twinkle in his eye, "I'm 83. What are they gonna do? Take away my blaster?" The crowd roared. And somewhere, in that warm studio light, a living legend had just reminded everyone why some stories, and some women, never fade. As the room filled with laughter and quiet awe, Harrison Ford leaned back, eyes reflecting a lifetime of memories. These weren't just names from the past. They were pieces of a story that shaped him. He didn't talk like a man chasing old flames. He spoke like someone honoring moments that burned bright once and left a warm light behind. "You don't meet people like that twice," he said softly, almost to himself. The crowd quieted, hanging on to every word. For decades, he'd been the charming rogue, the quiet storm, the man whose smirk could disarm anyone. But in this moment, he wasn't a legend on a pedestal. He was simply a man, remembering, smiling, and grateful for every stolen glance and unspoken connection. It was less a confession, and more a love letter to time itself.